Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We have the Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Missouri, Zora Mulligan, with us. She's the second candidate for the Executive Vice President Provost position. And in case, for those of you that didn't come last week, let me outline kind of how we're going to manage this. I'm going to ask the first five or six questions to get the conversation going and allow you to get to know the commissioner a little bit, and then we will open it up for you. And the great bulk of the time until we end at 4:30 is for you to ask questions to her. And we'll have microphones that will come to you so that you can be amplified. We are recording this, and the recording will be posted, we hope, by tomorrow on the Provost Search website. So if you haven't been to the Provost Search website yet, go to our homepage, and in the search bar just type in Provost Search, and that will take it there, and you'll see a summary of each candidate and their full CVs there, and each town hall or each public forum will be posted there. Now here's the important piece. I am meeting with our search committee next week to get their feedback on this, and so for your feedback to count, you've got to fill out the survey online by like Monday at noon. And so go back and do it tonight, do it tomorrow, do it this weekend, but we want to get as much feedback on the search as we can. And so with that, that's kind of our introduction, and I'm going to ask Zora to give some opening remarks, and then we'll begin the questions.
Well, sure.
Zora?
So first, I just want to start by saying it's a pleasure to be here. I got in a little bit before the rain began, but I suspect many of you braved the elements to come out and have a chance to ask me some questions and get to know me a little bit. Many of you may have interacted with me or with the department in the past, and so I'm glad to see you again. We really appreciate the partnership of people on our institutions. I'm also just really excited to learn more about the questions and concerns you have, because it'll help me start to understand the vision and the expectations that the campus community has for the person who will hold this very important role.
Very good. Well, take a few minutes then and introduce yourself and kind of hit some of the highlights in your career.
Sure. So I think, if I had to describe my career, I would say that it's characterized by, number one, a career-long commitment to public service. Other than a very brief stint working at a private law firm during law school, which I did not love, I've been a public servant since 2003, and again, just have had really great experiences. I worked for the Attorney General's office for 5 years. I was the Assistant Attorney General. I handled cases including environmental protection, consumer protection. It was a really phenomenal experience, and it gave me the beginning of an appreciation of what issues citizens of Missouri face around the state, not just in the place that I'm from, which is West Plains, or the place that I went to college, which is Springfield, or the place that I live, which is Jeff City. I had a chance at the tail end of my time at the Attorney General's office to join the Missouri Department of Higher Education as the General Counsel and the Legislative Liaison, which is what we in state government call the agency's lobbyist. It was an interesting experience. I did not know anything about the Missouri General Assembly or the incredibly Byzantine processes on which it runs. My bacon was saved in that job by a good friend from college who happened to be the chief of staff to a senator, and so I was able to go to that person and say, what does it mean when the following happens? And he really coached me to a point where I became really comfortable. In that job, it was really the beginning of my time working in public higher education, and more specifically advocating for public higher education. As the legislative liaison, it was my job to go across the street and to explain the impact of various ideas that come out of the Capitol might have in their real application in the higher education setting. So it was formative. I learned a whole lot, and again, it was just a great experience. In that job, I also had the opportunity to write the rules and the regulations that implemented some landmark legislation. Again, a really good opportunity to learn about the various interests of all the different public colleges and universities in the state, to find out what their pain points are, what their concerns were, and to really set the stage for everything that's come in the decades that followed. So from the department, I went on to work for the Community College Association. It was, again, a sector that I didn't know all that much about when I started. I went to Drury College, which is pretty different from a community college, and I'll date myself by saying that when I went to Drury, it was still bigger than OTC. And there was one student at Drury that I knew who was taking a class with the intent to transfer, and we all thought that person was an absolute genius. It was novel and exciting. So I, again, worked for the Community College Association, had a chance to really develop a respect for that set of institutions, and particularly for the students they served. Even though I went to Drury and had a great experience, I grew up really poor with a bunch of people who would have lived better lives if they'd had more access to education. And so it was good to serve the mission of those institutions and those students. From there, I went to the University of Missouri system. Again, pretty much as far from a community college as you can get. The University of Missouri system consists of the 4 campuses: Columbia, St. Louis, Kansas City, and then S&T in Rolla, which you guys probably know, and had a chance to really learn more, again, about research in particular. I had not learned a lot about research in my time with the community colleges, but it was a big part of the overall strategic plan of the university, and therefore something I worked with very actively. Learned a lot about promotion and tenure decisions, learned a lot just about the tremendous challenges that face the leaders of our public universities as a whole. So that job was interesting. I was there during a time of racial protest on campus. There was an active and ongoing discussion about abortion rights on campus that we were working with. There was active conversations about unionization of graduate students and of faculty. So again, it was just a fascinating time to be at the university. And the shortest way to explain it is to tell you that I learned a lot. So I was, doing that job and enjoying it. I was working for the new president and enjoying that. And the Commissioner for Higher Education position came open. And I was not convinced that I wanted to apply for the job. It was, at the time, the department was in a little bit of a low point. It had faced some really significant budget challenges that created huge issues with department morale. So I was really on the fence, and I talked to a friend of mine who worked for one of the institutions. He gave me this great speech about, public service, and the state needs you, and you really need to apply. This will be so important. It's our mission to serve. And I was eventually persuaded to apply, and it's been a really rewarding experience. The asterisk on that would be, I talked to the same friend years later. We were both getting ready to give commencement addresses, and I asked what the theme of his address was, and he said, it's like public service, and you really need to apply yourself to public service, and only you. And I thought, I fell for this. I thought this was a customized conversation. I fell for it completely, and I've been at the department for 5.5 years. It's been a pretty wild ride.
So I suspect there are people in the room that may not know exactly what the Commissioner for Public Higher Education does. Would you talk a little bit about what that job entails and some of the successes you have had in your tenure there?
Sure. So the number one thing the job requires is a great deal of patience and a lot of persistence. Programmatically, what we do, I would say we have 5 major pillars of what we do. Our department was established in the 1970s to really coordinate public higher education. There had been a massive expansion of college campuses around the state, especially the regional universities. There were people in the state capitol who weren't really comfortable with the growth that those regional universities were showing, and they wanted someone other than themselves to keep the regional institutions in their place. And so that was kind of the original theory of the Department of Higher Education. And so in that coordination function, we give approval to new academic programs. When an institution wants to offer classes at a new site or establish a new campus someplace other than its home campus, we consider and approve those requests. So that coordination function is really the foundation of our DNA. We also, over time, took on a role with affordability. As it became more important to have more people get into higher education, the state recognized a need for state student financial aid programs. And so we administer programs like A+ and Bright Flight, Access Missouri, which is our need-based aid program, our new adult financial aid program called Fast Track. So affordability is another really important part of what we do. In the 2010s, many of you probably will recall that there was a huge shift in the conversation about higher education, driven largely by the Obama administration and definitely picked up by the Nixon administration here in the state of Missouri, to focus not just on access, but to focus on student success. And there was a real belief that states had the ability to improve student success by working in partnership with institutions, and that state approach would have the ability to really change things at scale in a way that working with individual institutions couldn't. And so success became the third major pillar of what we do as a department. The fourth big pillar is outreach. We have an outreach team that goes out and talks with students about the importance of higher education, what alternatives are out there for paying for higher education, help students get a sense of the lay of the land. A student who might not think they're ready to go to S&T could enter at East Central College and have a good general education foundation before they then transfer to S&T to get an engineering degree. And so our team are the people that talk with students, not to sell them any one institution or any one program of study, but to say, higher education is amazing and you really should pursue it. Here are some resources that might be helpful. So the fourth pillar is outreach. And then last but not least, and most recently, we also have responsibility for the state's public workforce system. And I know we have public workforce friends in the house, just want to say hello. So basically what that means, people talk all the time about workforce development. There's not a lot of understanding about what it actually means. For our department, what it means is that we work closely with the local workforce development boards in their administration of the public workforce program dollars to make sure that they have performance targets and that we're doing everything we can to support them in meeting those targets. Your local workforce development board, and by the way, Springfield has an exceptionally good local workforce development board. They help people get jobs just to get that first rung on the ladder, get into the workforce and start earning and having a little more stability. And they also have access to federal job training funds. And so through referrals to organizations like OTC or Missouri State, they have the ability to help people not just get to that first rung, but really on a ladder that can lead to increased prosperity. And then we also, in the workforce function, are able to do some programmatic things at the department level. We've really been huge advocates of apprenticeship programs, of some shorter-term credential programs that are more accessible to the kinds of people who need them most. And so it's a big part of what we do. I would just say one last thing, and that is, those are our official 5 pillars. We have another pillar, which is really focused on internally making our department the best place to work, because we recognize that we can't do any of those 5 things unless we have a team that's highly motivated and has the resources they need to accomplish our mission, which is huge.
Well, I know here we appreciate the work you've done to help us expand our graduate programs and the MOExcel's funding, and so you've been a great partner for us, and wanted to acknowledge that. What are a couple of things that you are most proud of in your tenure at the state?
That's a great question. So I would say the things that I'm most proud of, at the very beginning of my time as commissioner, I inherited a pretty big dispute that Missouri State had instigated. So thank you, President Smart. I appreciate that.
Happy to help.
About the degree of freedom that Missouri State should have in offering doctoral programs primarily. And so we had a very, very big conversation, basically starting my first day on the job, to try to reach consensus about a reasonable way to give Missouri State more flexibility to meet the needs of the workforce that exist in the state of Missouri. It was a very, very difficult conversation, but we achieved consensus that I think represents a pretty good balance of all of the interest. In the connection with that conversation, we also created mechanisms for faster approval of most academic programs, because we kind of took the perspective that we trust institutions. If they're doing something that's within their regular mission, then it makes sense for them to have a great deal of flexibility in doing that. But that first ability to achieve consensus on an issue that had burned through the General Assembly was a really important accomplishment. It was important to me, not because I have a particular allegiance to Missouri State University, but it was important to me because I recognize that it's not enough to tell someone you could drive to Columbia to get that degree. People really need close resources that they can access if they're going to move into the highest levels of employment in our communities. And so I think, for example, about the new PsyD program that you guys are going to be offering. Every person I talk to in the state, not just after COVID, but before, has identified student mental health and faculty and staff mental health as one of the most serious issues they face. And so under the old regime, it would have been nearly impossible for Missouri State to offer that PsyD program. And I'm proud that it's going to be a reality here in the near future. So that comprehensive review thing was big, very challenging. Missouri State was a good partner in that conversation, but I have to acknowledge the University of Missouri was as well. So that's a big one. Another major accomplishment would be We just have done a lot of work to try to make transfer easier for students moving, not just from a community college to a public university or another university, but even among community colleges or from one university to another. So a lot of work in partnership with faculty at institutions around the state to increase the probability that a student's credits are going to transfer for what they took them for, as opposed to just for an elective. So that's a big one. Something that is personally relevant to me is Math Pathways, which was something we did, again, with leadership at the state level and partnership with math faculty around the state to present students with alternatives to Algebra 1. And those alternatives, are intended to be more relevant to the kinds of things that students are going to need to think about, and also as a recognition that Algebra 1 class, especially for students who are really struggling academically, can be a significant impediment to graduation. It's important to me because I am not, math is not my first language, and so, but in my job now I do math all the time, every day, with the help of a lot of Excel spreadsheets, but for me it was very important to recognize the changing world. So Math Pathways was a big one. And then most recently, we have a new student financial aid program that's targeted to adults. It's called Fast Track. Getting it passed in the legislature was a challenging task, and it was one that could never have happened if I was the only one advocating for it. The thing that was important about the workforce reforms that the governor put into place a couple of years ago is that, number one, they reflected the feedback of citizens across the state. I spent about a year working with my counterpart at the Department of Economic Development, talking with people in communities around the state to learn about the issues that face their communities, both in terms of their workforce needs, but probably more poignantly, how are they feeling about demographic changes? Many communities around the state don't have the luxury that Springfield does of long-term growth. They're really struggling. And people, came to these conversations with open hearts and a lot of really good insight. So, through that conversation, we picked up a lot of allies, and those allies were very helpful in getting Fast Track and several other important reforms passed. So we have done a lot in the last 5.5 years. You kind of lose track of some of it. Final thing I would add is I was proud, as I think so many are around the state, of the way our team internally came together to respond to COVID. We, just like you, we had to look after our own people, but also look after the citizens we serve. And it was just phenomenal to see the way our employees responded to the needs of the people of the state of Missouri during a time that was super challenging for all of us.
How big is your department and what's the budget?
Sure. So we have 330 employees. They're located around the state. Some of them work with our friends here at the Springfield Job Center. And then the budget is about $450 million. About 80% of that is program. A lot of that's student financial aid programs. 20% of it is workforce funds, and then about whatever the balance of, 15% is workforce funds, 5% is personnel and expense and equipment.
Good. All right, with that background, tell us why you're interested in this position.
That's such a good position, or a good question. I was saying earlier that when my friends who were provosts found out I was applying for this job, their first question was why? And then their second question was, is it too late to withdraw? Because the provost job is really hard. I'm not sure at Missouri State you guys realize that fully, because Frank has been here so long and has done such a masterful job of really building trust and relationships with people all over campus. But at many institutions, the provost by far has the hardest job on campus. So what led me to apply? Number one, when I wasn't sure I would apply. I heard Frank was retiring. I started to give it some thought. And then when I saw the position requirements that were posted, I asked myself very seriously, do I think I could do this job? And after a lot of reflection, I concluded I think that I can. The provost job is complicated, probably not well understood by a lot of people on campus, but I view it as, in part, management responsibilities. So, presiding over a budget and using processes that people will perceive as fair and be willing to support. Dealing with a lot of personnel matters. That's probably the majority of a provost time. Providing the resources that people need to be successful. Those kinds of things are a really important part of the job, and it's stuff that I do have experience with. Managing a large budget, having a large number of people, the ability to gain consensus on difficult and challenging issues. So that management piece is certainly something that I feel comfortable with, although I will have a lot to learn. The leadership piece is, in addition, and that's the ability to, work with people to identify a vision, to articulate that vision often and consistently, and to get people excited about working together to achieve the vision. one of my observations, particularly from having worked at the Community College Association, is the surest way to fail is to try to push something from the top down. Initiatives are only successful if they come up and they are, owned very organically by faculty and staff. But it needs to be in alignment with the overall vision of the institution.
So you would come to the position from a non-traditional route. So talk to me about the importance of faculty,
Sure.
your interaction with faculty, how you navigate faculty kinds of personnel issues.
Sure, absolutely. So when I was the chief of staff at the University of Missouri system, we did deal with a lot of faculty issues, but they tended to be somewhat different than what the provost will. So for example, I worked with the president as he worked with the faculty senate to revise the collected rules and regulations of the UM system. That is challenging because it not only is the task that you face here, trying to address the needs of Missouri State University, but it's 4 very different campuses that are all governed by one set of collected rules and regulations. The hardest issue that we tackled during the time that I was there was a very hard one, and it was Title IX. There was, obviously a lot of emotion in that conversation. The University of Missouri had a tragic and very public incident that was related to Title IX and that really spurred a lot of urgency. And if there's one thing that makes faculty nervous, it's that sense of urgency. So finding ways to balance the president's and the board's sense of urgency with the faculty's need to consider very carefully every change that we were talking about was something that I was working on in the first 6 months of my time at the University of Missouri system. We also, in that job, I helped the president as he considered personnel matters, and that would include, things like post-tenure review or challenging tenure decisions. My observation in that role is that it's very critical to, number one, respect the decisions of everyone that's come in the process before you, and to know that people have put a lot of time and thought into all of those considerations, and that people who are very close to the process have had a chance to weigh in. I know from my time in my current job the importance of rigorously following processes, and when things get difficult, the thing that's absolutely critical to be able to do looking back is to say, these are our policies, we followed them rigorously, and we applied them fairly. So those faculty issues, again, are largely from my time at the University of Missouri system. I've done lots of other work that's engaged faculty. At the Community College Association, we had a series of big federal grants that really asked faculty to think differently about what they were teaching, how they were teaching it, and that was very interesting. I learned a lot, again, my euphemism, but it was interesting. In my current role, we also work with faculty. I mentioned several initiatives that really have been in close partnership with faculty people. What I would say in terms of navigating the challenges, like I said, I think process is very, very critical. I spoke with the deans and the provost office staff earlier and shared with them the example of MoExcels, which you mentioned. MoExcels is a grant program that gives the commissioner of higher education in the department say over a very significant amount of resources. So the first year it was $15 million, the second year it was $25 million, this year it's $35 million. And those are dollars that are awarded by the commissioner and approved by the General Assembly. What I learned the very first year was that there will be many people who do not get money from this, and they're going to call their legislator first thing Monday morning. And so, having to have the experience of going over to the legislature and talking with some very influential leaders about our process, how rigorously we followed it, showing them a good example, showing them a bad example, was the only thing that kept me from getting fired the first day.
Change topics for a minute. 2 more questions, and then we'll open it up for those that are here. External work is more and more important for academic administrators as higher ed changes. Can you give some examples of successful partnerships that you have formed or led? Sure.
So in terms of successful partnerships, going certainly back to my time at the Community College Association, all of those grants, which totaled about $50 million that we launched, were partnerships with local employers. So, working, for example, with, a healthcare employer who was really invested in helping ensure that they had the healthcare workforce they needed. They were a big part of, talking about the curriculum, giving students learning opportunities. And so building that network of support was a large part of the reason that we were successful in competing for the grant. grants. During my time at the University of Missouri system, it was very different. You know, the kinds of external constituents that they work are different than the Community College Association, as you can expect. But it was interesting that even in those conversations, you know, a lot of the people that we were working with had an interest in having a highly skilled and educated workforce, but also a really good understanding of the importance of people who can write well, you know, think carefully and speak publicly. In my current role, external partnerships have been a huge part of what I have focused on, and so I mentioned earlier the initiative that I led in partnership with economic development. Those involve partnerships with the local workforce development boards, as well as the staff who work at those boards, partnerships with employers, very, very strong support from the chambers around the state, including notably, I'm going to say this even though it's going to be publicly recorded, the best chamber in the state, the Springfield Chamber, is really, really good. And those people, number one, helped, you know, kind of shape the overall agenda, but also helped advocate for it successfully.
Last question. I want you to discuss your experience and understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education, and give us an example of a specific initiative you have led or begun in your organization.
Sure. Well, you know, my time at the University of Missouri system was a time where I grew a lot in my understanding of the issues that students, faculty, and staff of color face on campus. I went into that job like a lot of people probably do, which is a person who thinks of myself as fair-minded and a good heart, and thinking that that was probably enough. You know, that I would be helping achieve equity just by being a basically decent person. And in that job, I observed that we don't get to choose what we're going to be held accountable for. So, you know, the University of Missouri system president, when students initially began protesting on campus, the system president said, well, that's a campus issue, which traditionally it would be, but he wasn't able to not be accountable to students. And we also don't always recognize the vast reach of that accountability. So, you know, the most public and challenging situation is when students or faculty or staff or all of the above are protesting on campus, and we think that's what accountability looks like. Or when that happens and the president resigns, that's accountability. What I learned through a lot of conversations at the University of Missouri is that accountability is also when students visit your campus and don't feel safe, so they don't come. When you have an incident on campus that people think has been dealt with poorly and parents tell their kids they're not comfortable sending their kid to your school. When you have faculty and staff who leave quietly and don't explain why. When you have alumni who did not have a great experience and do not become engaged. There are lots of quieter ways that leaders are held accountable for making sure that the campus provides the opportunities for everyone to be successful. I could talk a long time about the University of Missouri. I learned a lot. You know, I shared this, I think, with the search committee earlier, but something that really has stayed with me is that it was a surprise to a lot of people that students of color were having challenging experiences on campus, and it really shouldn't have been. And so I have, you know, made an effort in my current job, when I think about myself as a leader internally for the department, to really talk to our employees of color and develop relationships that allow them to build some trust and tell me when there are issues. We have had some challenging issues that have been, you know, hard to hear, hard to fix, but we've begun to think about the best ways to address them. In terms of specific things we've done, there's a lot. You know, this has been a major focus of my time at the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. We kind of began by doing an annual equity report that provides data about outcomes for students in different groups. We focused on access, success, and we've also done affordability. And so that report is an important document that provides information, but it also makes a statement that the state of Missouri is interested in understanding the challenges that students are facing on campus. In connection with that, we do a big, a convening where we bring people together to talk about the topic, to identify some best practices and give people an opportunity to think about how they might apply at their own institutions. So those two things are big parts of what our department does, you know, providing data and convening people. We also have done a lot to increase our outreach to students from diverse backgrounds. We've partnered with organizations around the state that do have primary relationships with all different kinds of prospective students. And so whether it's, you know, having our outreach team talk with them about higher education options, or having our apprenticeship team talk with them about, you know, options that are available through apprenticeships, we've been really intentional in recognizing that not everyone is thrilled when somebody from the state shows up with a big stack of brochures, but it's a much better conversation if it's facilitated by a trusted local organization. I would say most importantly, we have I have tried at every time I can to put my money where my mouth is in terms of making decisions that include equity as a consideration. So that MOExcel's grant program includes additional weighting for institutions that serve students who have been historically underrepresented or that have a plan to increase enrollment of students who have been historically underrepresented in the program that we're considering funding. When we allocated the first rounds of federal funding, we weighted heavily students who are Pell Grant recipients, which is another way of addressing equity. So in the decisions that I have some power over, I have tried to make equity a consideration.
Very good. All right, it's your turn. And Nikki has a microphone on this side, and I know we've got a microphone on this side as well, and so let's start.
Hi, Zora. My name is Letitia White-Minnis. I'm in the College of Health and Human Services. Just wanted to quickly thank you for your support of our new doctoral programs and supporting that process that would let us move for doctoral programs in a non-comprehensive review. And so I guess my question would be, you have a lot of context and knowledge of higher ed in our state here in Missouri. I'm wondering, what do you think we as an institution should be thinking about as we're moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reality of budget challenges is something that's a primary consideration without me ever telling you that it should be. And so as we look at an environment where, although we have seen increased state investment in the last couple of years, and that's appreciated, it's not keeping up with inflation, and that's a very real concern. And there's a lot of volatility in state funding. So, one good year is often followed by one catastrophic year. That makes it very hard to build a budget. When you pair that with enrollment challenges that all of our higher education institutions in general are going to be looking at, it creates an environment in which budget challenges are going to be dominant conversations on campus, and it's hard to get anything good done when all of the oxygen is taken up with budget conversations. So in terms of what I think the strategic focus should be, there are definitely opportunities for resource diversification, and they have the opportunity to provide some additional resources that will be important. But we also have to keep in mind that the two biggest sources of money for the institution are going to be student tuition and state funding. And so really focusing on enrollment, again, you don't need me to tell you this is a big deal. When we look at, number one, just the current state of how things stand today, we have 6 community colleges around the state that have enrollment declines more than 20% in the last 5 years, 5 public universities more than 20%. And that's at the beginning of what we know is going to be a pretty long demographic cliff in terms of the number of students who are going to be graduating from high school. So, between now and the next 15 years, there are going to be 7% less students graduating from high school than there are today. Those declines will be most pronounced for white students, 10% decline, 5% in the number of black high school students who are going to be graduating, and the growth will be for students who are Latinx or who identify as multiracial. So I do think, when one element needs to be thinking about how to make Missouri State a welcoming environment to an increasingly diverse student body, because it's going to be important for the bottom line, but it's also good for the institution, good for the students, and good for the state. And then I think more broadly, figuring out ways to make the campus more accessible to adult learners. There's a huge population in the Ozarks and beyond of people who have no college but could be successful in school, or who have some college and no degree. And so I think that's going to be another really important focus. Again, good for the institution financially, tremendously beneficial for the individual, and good for the state overall.
Hello. The Provost is the Chief Academic Officer of the university. And as a faculty member, one of the most important things that we see the Provost doing is evaluating the research and teaching of faculty members when they're going up for tenure or promotion. Could you please share with us how your background has prepared you to do these evaluations effectively?
Sure, absolutely. So one, as I said, I think when I worked at the University of Missouri system, I learned a lot about all of the levels of review that are applied in the promotion and tenure process, and all of the different groups that have an opportunity to review those portfolios. Those people bring tremendous expertise to the process, and so the provost's role is primarily receiving recommendations and then thinking about how to apply them. There will be challenging situations where there are questions. Those would be matters that I would discuss carefully with the president, certainly with the general counsel as well. But I think that respect for the steps in the process that come before a decision reaches the provost office would be my primary response. My second one would be just to reiterate, my experience with the importance of applying process consistently and fairly. And so as the provost, on individual matters, those are things where I would need to confer with the president and others to make sure we got to the right decision for individuals. But I think the provost also has a responsibility to step back and ask if the system overall is producing fair results. And if not, are there things that need to change about the system or about the way that we're administering it to make sure that we're achieving fair results in the promotion and tenure process.
Thank you. A diverse body of staff and faculty is demonstrated to improve learning and retention of a diverse student, staff, and faculty body. So what new retention efforts within the university do you intend to start and fund for minoritized faculty and staff?
Sure. So I hesitate to answer questions about specific things I would do because I have a lot to learn about what's already underway, what has been attempted in the past and been successful, and what's been attempted and not successful. I will acknowledge that the activities that you've identified are incredibly important, and if they are important, the budget should reflect that importance. So I don't have an answer on the silver bullet, but I can tell you, the kinds of things we focused on at the University of Missouri system, really was focused on improved advising, and so using tools like the Starfish system to improve advising. It wasn't targeted for minoritized students, but it was a general approach that was having some early signs of success at the time that I left. At the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development, again, we've really focused on improving transfer, making it easier for students to complete their required courses, or not easier, but giving alternative paths to required courses. So things like co-requisite education for students who might otherwise have tested into remedial courses. Those have had positive impacts on students from different demographic groups, and so I think that's something to be proud of. But again, I would want to have a lot of conversation rather than just coming in and firing off with a bunch of brand new ideas. It's important to understand the context in which they'd be launched.
Commissioner Mulligan, thank you very much for your answers to the questions and your presentation. I'll play the devil's advocate here. Traditionally, a provost has almost always been a tenured faculty member, has moved up through the system within a university, maybe not where they will become provost, has been a director or a dean. That's something that one of the few things that you've not had in your resume. How would you address that? There would be some uneasiness with the faculty, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, I just want to acknowledge and respect the concern that faculty members have about someone whose experience is really different than theirs. And I just respect that. It's perfectly reasonable to be asking these questions, and I don't view it as a confrontation. I would say, generally, in my experience, it's good to have people with different backgrounds and different perspectives participating in decision-making in any organization. So, when I think about the processes that lead up to someone becoming a faculty member, a tenured faculty member, they're a very unique set of experiences that are unlike, the experiences that people on the other side have. So in my experience, again, people with different perspective bring the ability to see things differently, to suggest different solutions. Some of those will be off base and some of those will be on base, but I think that people with lots of different ways of looking at things are generally a strength in an organization.
Thank you. I have two questions. 6 weeks ago, University of Missouri committed $500 million over a period of 5 years towards faculty and staff raises. Yeah. They also committed towards hiring a bare minimum of 150 faculty over a period of 5 years. If hired as number 2 administrator in the university, how would you respond to this financial firepower coming from University of Missouri? And my second question is, what are your thoughts on academic research done by faculty without the support of any grant?
Yeah. So, number one, the question about the University of Missouri's announcement about the investment of huge resources in faculty salaries is a really important note to make. One thing that I think people don't understand about the University of Missouri system's advantage over other institutions has to do with resource diversification. You know, they have a University of Missouri healthcare system that right now is operating very profitably, and so a pretty big chunk of that money that will be used for faculty salaries is coming from the healthcare system. That's obviously an option that Missouri State University doesn't have, and so you're correct in identifying it as a lot of firepower that is in some ways a shot across the bow for other institutions that are not able to compete in that way. I would say that having worked at the University of Missouri system, there are things about that place that might or might not be a great fit for lots of different kinds of faculty. I'm a big believer in feel and the right institution for the right person. I think that Missouri State has a very unique mission that will appeal to a lot of faculty. You know, salaries are one part of the overall decision-making process, but the opportunity to work at an institution like this one, I think, is one that would be treasured by a lot of people. I would also add, you know, a unique thing about the University of Missouri and its research environment in particular is there is they're very interested in maintaining their AAU status, and so that has a very formative effect on what they choose to prioritize in terms of research. When I was at the system, again, I mentioned I supported the president in strategic initiatives around research. One of them was the idea of having signature hires. So, you know, very high profile, highly productive faculty members who would come in with significant additional compensation, bring their teams, have, you know, big startup budgets. And that was very good for the people who were in those disciplines, but it left a lot of other people, and people on other campuses in particular, wondering if their research mattered to the administration. So I think that, you know, a place like like Missouri State University, which has a much broader approach to supporting faculty research, will be appealing to an awful lot of faculty members for whom the University of Missouri and Columbia isn't where they want to be.
Hello, welcome back to Springfield. And I wondered, you've mentioned workforce development several times, and I wondered what you feel about the role of the arts, humanities, social sciences in both workforce development and in the student educational experience.
Yeah, so I'll start just by talking about workforce development in general. You know, when our department took on workforce development functions, there were definitely a lot of people who were concerned that in some ways that cheapened, you know, higher education, or it equated higher education exclusively with preparation for the workforce. That's not the way we have gone about the work of the new combined department. You know, workforce development is, or, you know, preparation for jobs is one of the things that higher education does, but higher education does a lot of other very important things. I hold a bachelor's degree in psychology and in political science, and the things that I learned in those degree programs were really, really critical to the success that I've had over the long term, whether it was in the general education component of those programs or the upper division courses. A lot of the building blocks of who I am today were established in those early courses. I would also say, you know, again, as we talked with people around the state about what they're most interested in new employees, part of what they're interested in is people who have specific technical skills. But the reality is the world is changing so fast around us, the workplace is changing so rapidly, that if you're prepared with a very specific set of skills the day you leave college, those will rapidly be outdated. And so what employers really need are people who can think critically, problem solve, communicate with colleagues around the country, around the world. And those are all things that the social sciences, liberal arts, the humanities are really positioned in an excellent way to address. I would also add, I had a really, really interesting and perspective-changing conversation with the chancellor at Missouri University of Science and Technology about the role of the humanities, liberal arts in, you know, their campus, which is weighted very, very, very heavily, obviously, toward engineering. And he shared an observation that has really stayed with me, which is that it's more important now than ever that people who have technical degrees also have a solid grounding in other things. And the examples that he gave were someone who is going to be programming units of artificial intelligence needs to have a very deep understanding of what humanity is. And I thought that was revelatory. Or someone who's going to be building a bridge needs to have a really good understanding of how historically those projects have affected different communities in this country. So a lot of people, wring their hands or feel nervous about what might happen with the humanities or with liberal arts education. I think there is still tremendous importance in those studies, and I look forward to supporting them in my time here.
Hello, and thank you for being here today. My question is about sort of a faculty governance issue, but I am aware that in the University of Missouri system that they have department chairs versus department heads.
Right.
And we have department heads here. So what are your thoughts on the potential of transitioning or your support for such a thing?
Sure. So I think that both models have strengths and weaknesses, which sounds like a politician's answer, and I don't mean it to. Yes, at the University of Missouri, they have department chairs, and that chair model provides an opportunity for lots of different people in a department to learn about what it really takes to be an administrator, to find out if they're interested in pursuing that in the long term. It prevents the development of fiefdoms to some extent, or it at least spreads out the fief. And so, it has strengths in those ways. I see value in both approaches. I lean more toward a head model, and that's because I think, really many of the most important decisions at a university are made at the department level. So if you think about budgets, personnel, space allocation, those are often department level decisions, and I think that they are made better by someone who has experience as an administrator and who has an interest in developing those skills. So, I would not propose to come in and immediately impose a change one way or the other, but in my observation, there's a lot of strength in the head model.
It's me? Okay. Hi, yeah. I wonder, I'm just going to, my name is Chris Hare. I'm a faculty member in theater and dance and immediate past chair of Faculty Senate. The position as written is a big umbrella, let's be honest. And to a certain extent, we all, faculty, staff, administration, students, we all share some goals. We want a strong, robust university. We want a high enrollment. We want strong academic programs. That said, there are also some things that are particular concerns of each group. Faculty are concerned very much with academic freedom. And you can't be unaware of the bills creeping through various state legislatures across the country to curtail academic freedom. We're very concerned with curriculum and the control over curriculum. Because from our perspective, the entire university is built on the idea of faculty expertise. Yeah. We are the masters of what we teach. So the question that I want to get to is about shared governance. Mm-hmm. And how you work with faculty to maintain that the sort of the faculty lead over curriculum and the faculty a commitment to shared governance, and how you would continue to do that. Sure.
So shared governance is obviously integral to the long-term success of a university or of a university. It is. The academic mission is the heart of the university, and an essential component of that is the academic freedom and the faculty's control over the curriculum that you describe. In terms of how I would support it, I know it sounds corny, but the step that I would take first is to listen and to begin to identify the different concerns that different groups of faculty have about what they perceive as encroachment on their ability to make decisions about promotion and tenure, or about who to hire, or what the curriculum should be, or how they teach it. And to, again, just get a sense of what the real concerns are. There's so much negative conversation in the air in state legislatures across the country about curriculum, but it's also important to understand what's happening on the ground here at Missouri State University. And so the first approach I would take is really just understanding specifically what the concerns are, and if there are examples of that encroachment, to begin to understand how we might begin to address them. Other, how I would respect shared governance, there is the formal process of shared governance. In my current job, it's not a university, and so we don't have formal shared governance as it would be, defined technically, but it's absolutely essential to my success in the work that I do that we consult very regularly and candidly with lots of different groups. And so when I, started at the department, there were no formal mechanisms for feedback from, for example, college presidents. And so we created a commissioner's advisory group that we put all of our major decisions in front of on a quarterly basis to find out what their feedback is going to be. Again, that's technically different than what shared governance looks like at a public university, but in spirit, it's very similar. I've often found, too, that sometimes people viewed shared governance as like a necessary set of steps that must be taken in order to get something over the finish line. But both at the University of Missouri system and then with this thing that is not shared governance but is a lot of consultative leadership, things get better the more you talk about them with people and the more different ideas you hear about the document or the idea that you put in front of them. So, both as a formal set of processes, as a set of principles, but also most pragmatically, trying to arrive at something that really will make sense for the faculty who will be implementing this in the classroom or who will be affected by changes in the rules around promotion and tenure. I'm a big believer in listening to people, taking feedback very seriously, and that would be what I would bring to my approach in this role.
Thank you for being with us today, Zora. Two questions that have kind of come out of the discussion today. You talked about participating in some legislation in Missouri. I'm interested to learn more about that. And you've also mentioned resource diversification for our campus. Can you give us a sense of what that could potentially look like?
Sure.
Thank you.
So in terms of engagement with the legislature, I'm the primary advocate for the higher education budget, although I do that in partnership and with a tremendous amount of support from the colleges and universities that we advocate on behalf of. So I definitely am a person who spends a lot of time in the Capitol talking about the importance of investing in public higher education. We also weigh in on some legislation, but not all, that affects higher education. We tend to speak most about the bills that our department would have a role in administering. That means that we're not weighing in on every battle, which is something about which I personally have mixed feelings. But as based on my position in state government, we speak mostly about the things that would affect our department. I can point to some successes that have taken a really long time to achieve. One, our state's need-based financial aid program, which is a very important resource to poor students and students of color in particular, has been underfunded for many, many years. Every year we have presented a request to the budget that would fully fund that need-based aid program, and every year it's just been written off without a lot of attention. We have gained the support, or an advocate has been formed on the budget committee, and this year, finally, for the first time, this program is going to be fully funded. And so, over time, with a lot of conversation and providing a lot of data, we have been able to make some positive changes, although I would never claim that we've gotten everything done that needs to be accomplished. In terms of resource diversification, I think of the big buckets. We talked about this a lot at the University of Missouri system. I feel like I'm channeling the chief financial officer, but you're really talking about continuing education, research commercialization, asset utilization, partnerships, and then providing services. Providing services, like I said, the University of Missouri through their healthcare system has the ability to generate tremendous amount of resources. I think for Missouri State University, the primary driver will likely be in continuing education. And so when I met earlier with the deans, we talked a little bit about some of the innovation that's taking place in MBA programs, for example, or some non-credit programs that might allow people to build skills to advance in their current position. That seems like the most likely significant source of revenue from my perspective, but I would definitely want to talk with Steve Filkart and others, again, about what's been tried in the past and been successful, what can we learn from previous failures. But I do think increasingly we'll have to be thinking more creatively about resource diversification in the future.
Hi, Zora. I'm Jeff Jones, Department Head,
Hey, Jeff
Finance and General
Jones, Fellow
Business.
Panther.
Yeah, how are you? I actually graduated year before you did at Drury,
Yeah.
so I have that on you, I guess.
Jeff, you're not going to ask me a question about anything I did in college, are you?
I am not.
It was some other girl named Zora Mulligan. It was not me, I promise.
So Zora, the question I have is, obviously you would be coming, we've talked about how you'd be coming from this position from a non-traditional role. I've been a faculty member at 3 different universities. Drury University, at which was Drury College when we graduated, University of Arkansas, and Missouri State University. The students at each of those universities are very different, and they need different things. My question for you is, would you be willing to teach a class here to see the issues that we face as faculty?
Yeah. If you would have me, I would be very, very happy to do that.
I have law in my department.
I would be delighted. Yes, I would be delighted. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the regrets I have about my departure from the University of Missouri system was I had plans for how to kind of re-energize myself in the role that I was in that included, a shadowing someone who works at Stevens College, but also pursuing the possibility of teaching a couple of classes, because I do think it's really important to know what in the heck students are doing today. You know, I have a kids these days perspective. One of the things that always happened is I was going around Missouri and talking with people about communities and what they need. There was always a minute in the conversation where somebody would stand up and say something about kids these days, and the whole room would erupt in criticism about, the kind of kids that are graduating from high school today. I'm really interested in learning how much of that's valid, but also learning to see the good things that this group of students brings to their work. And so the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Maybe not the first semester.
Probably not the first semester.
Hi. Two quick questions. Going back to the issue of academic freedom, right now the political atmosphere in the country is such that people are self-censoring and so on. Students complain that they feel uncomfortable in class. If there is a situation where a student comes, or students come and complain about ideas that are discussed in class that make them uncomfortable and demand the censure of the faculty, where do you stand on that? That's question number one. Question number two is completely unrelated.
Can I do question number one first?
Yes.
I'll just start by acknowledging that it's really hard. And I think there is a time where we have to be willing to say that we accept all speech on campus as long as it's not harassment. And we welcome all of the various opinions that people are going to bring to the conversation. That's a really hard thing to stand up for because it's very, very unpopular sometimes. I'm always interested, in the hypocrisy in the conversation where people are comfortable with one set of views being expressed but believe another should be suppressed. But it's not helpful as a leader to note situations that are ironic. And so I do think, largely there's a time when we have to stand up for free speech, and I think we're in that minute. I also am of the view that more communication or more speech, not less, is the best antidote to challenging speech. And so rather than trying to limit what people say and take that approach, to instead provide alternative ways for thinking about things and to try to have another narrative so it's clear that the speech being expressed may or may not be the only set of opinions out there. So again, I just want to acknowledge that it's hard. I do a job where I think very carefully about all of the things that I say, and it's exhausting, honestly, to often find myself unable to say the things that I want to say as freely as I would like to do so. So I have respect for the faculty who are in those situations, and will look forward to being an advocate.
And my question number two, a few minutes ago, in response to her question, you talked about on resource allocation. You mentioned that continuing education, we have to look at continuing education more carefully. And what I heard, or the way I'm interpreting that, is that you're thinking that MSU should be a 4-year version of OTC. Is that a fair conclusion to come to? Do we want to become our mission is more aligned with the mission of OTC, or is it something more?
Sure. So the answer is no. I think the relationship between OTC and Missouri State University is uniquely positive, and it's held up as an outstanding example around the state of the ways that a public university can work very effectively with its local community college. I have the sad situation of being involved in a couple of situations in other communities around the state where there is not a community college, and the community members are calling on the public university to step into that space, and the public university having difficulty meeting the challenge of the community. It's produced very, very bad conversations about the value of a public university and liberal arts in particular. So whether everyone knows it or not, the existence and the success of OTC and performing its mission is a very important asset to Springfield, but also very much to Missouri State, because it allows you to identify the university's role and also respect and complement the community college's role. I hear what you're saying about the possibility of continuing education starting to sound like workforce development that might be done by a community college, but I think the answer has to be some of both. There are things that that Missouri State University is uniquely positioned to do because of the faculty resources that are here. So if we think, for example, about an executive MBA program, which is one example that's generally kind of in the category of continuing education, the faculty at Missouri State have the resources to teach that program in a way that will be highly credible, viewed as an important asset that will have a lot of integrity. OTC has great faculty of a different type, and so they wouldn't be the best position to offer that kind of program. Also, thinking about healthcare and just the tremendous strength that Missouri State has had for a long time in healthcare programs, there are lots of jobs where the requirements are shifting. I mean, I mentioned earlier the increasing dynamic nature of the workforce. If you went to nursing school in 1990, the environment in which you're operating and the things you need to know to rise to the level of an administrator are probably different than what you did, as an undergrad. And so the opportunity to come back to Missouri State and to develop some skills that will help you reach that next level or to maintain relevance in your current role is, again, something that Missouri State is uniquely positioned to provide. So I think of it as a very clear extension of the tremendous brain power that Missouri State University faculty bring to the work they do, in a way to continue to extend the benefit of the education the university provides to reach an increasingly broad group of people.
Hello, thank you for coming to our campus. So my question is, one of our pillars is cultural competence, and also our strategic enrollment management centers an aspect on recruitment and retention. And so I'm just curious that if you were in this role, how do you see yourself advocating for faculty of color and promoting the importance of recruiting and retaining faculty of color?
Sure. So I think one of the Provost's most important responsibilities, as I said earlier, is to take a step back from individual decisions and look at the results the system is producing. And so to look at the data about retention and recruitment for faculty, about decisions on promotion and tenure, and to discern, do the data prompt us to ask any questions about whether our systems are equitable or whether they're being equitably exercised? So does the system make sense? Does it produce fair results for all different kinds of faculty members? And as we're implementing those practices, do we get fair results? So I view the provost role a little bit like my current role, which is, in diversity, equity, and inclusion, the focus needs to be on equity and making sure the system works fairly for everyone that we bring to the campus. In terms of recruitment, I think, again, emphasizing the strength of Missouri State University, the fact that cultural competence is a pillar of the institution's mission is something that will have resonance to lots of different kinds of faculty. I also, think it's important just to have a positive reputation as a welcoming place. There are networks in all different faculty groups, and people talk about whether it's a good place to be or not a good place to be. And so everything we can do to look at things like the campus climate survey, to do things like the forum that was held last week on campus, and to follow up on what comes out of those conversations, those are all the kinds of things that I think can help recruit and retain, as well as promote a diverse group of faculty.
Thank you. The cost of living in Springfield is rising astronomically, making it even harder for graduate students to live on their stipends, which are 50% lower than peer institutions. In addition to increasing stipends, many things could be done to help our students. For example, subsidized campus housing, better university public transport, and reduced or free campus meal plans. Could you describe the plans you have to make some immediate strides for improving support for our graduate students?
Sure. So this is another one where I apologize that it's not going to be as direct of an answer as you would like it to be. I hesitate to respond to situations where I have enough information to say something credibly. So the response is that I would work with the deans, other members of the leadership team, certainly the budget officer, to find out where there are areas of flexibility. Because having graduate students who can live and thrive at the university is a really important part of the university's mission. Again, these are issues that are being faced everywhere, but they are particularly acute in communities where the cost of living is increasing quickly. Those increases will affect students very profoundly, graduate students very profoundly, as well as faculty. So I think, as part of a larger conversation about trying to keep up in the environment in which we're working, graduate student stipends would have to be part of that conversation.
Hello. What is your vision and expectation for the future of online learning? And aside from COVID, it's rolling COVID.
Can you say that last word again? I'm sorry.
Your vision for the future of online learning and online students, but not specifically about COVID and the role of online learning during COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had the completely horrifying experience of doing an interview on St. Louis Public Radio that aired last week, and the headline they put on it was like, "Commissioner hates online learning," which I don't think was a fair characterization of what I said, and if that's how it sounded, I didn't intend it to. I think online learning is an incredibly important resource for lots of different kinds of students, but I think it has to be offered in balance with the amazing on-campus experience that brings so many people to an institution like Missouri State University. I have been around long enough that I remember when online learning started to be more of a thing and maybe ITV was being phased out. But I think it's really important for people to understand the great distance that distance education has come in the last 5 or 10 years. I do think online learning will need to do some reputation repair. A lot of people experienced online learning in the worst possible way for the first time during COVID, and I know you said not to focus on that, but someone like my daughter, who was in 8th grade at the time everybody got sent home for COVID, did not have a stellar online education experience, although it wasn't terrible. And if I told her, well, you could either go, to have life on a college campus, or you could just continue to live here in my basement and take classes online, she would definitely choose getting a little distance between herself and the computer screen. So I do think we have to anticipate the short and intermediate term reaction that a lot of people are going to have to the idea of online learning. That being said, pre-COVID, and I think will be true post-COVID, there are lots of students for whom online learning is a great either augmentation of their on-campus classes or a great alternative to their online classes. And I think a lot of faculty members got really good at online education over the course of COVID. Often it built on skills that they were developing before the shutdowns occurred. And so I think it's a mixed bag. And I think it has to be part of the overall portfolio of the way, the institution offers itself to the students it serves. I think of rural students in particular. From a place where people say, well, you could just drive to Springfield to get your bachelor's degree. I'm like, well, that's 100 miles away. It's not a very realistic solution for people who are place-bound. So, and other people who have had negative experiences in in-person school, or who have disabilities that makes it easier or more effective to learn remotely. So I think it's, again, part of an overall balance. I will say to you that 90 minutes is the longest I have ever talked in my whole life. And so if I'm starting to repeat myself, please just give me a sign. I'm sorry. I could tell you my life story 7 times in 90 minutes.
So part of our experience in online learning, and I'll give an example, our Master in Social Work had been a seated program, and I'll make up a number, had 50 students in it. Transition to online, because all of those people are working, had 200 students in it in a year. And so one of the things we have found that for graduate education for working adults, online is by far preferred. for undergraduate students, particularly as they get to the junior, senior level and they're working to help put themselves through college, living in Springfield, most of them, they may take some classes online, some classes blended, some classes seated to help figure out a work schedule, to help figure out what classes fit, when, and activities they want to be involved in, etc. On the other hand, starting out as an 18-year-old, much more challenging. So any sense of that yourself?
Sure. I hope I'm not the only person who feels this way, but I often find myself thinking, well, when I was in college, and then making a decision about today and today's students based on what was happening a long time ago to one individual person. For me, the experience of being in pretty small classes at Drury and having to stand up and articulate my views to my peers and to a professor, and to have dialogue where ideas were challenged in that in-person setting was really formative. And I have to remind myself that there are lots of great ways to have those conversations online, and lots of students for whom that is a preferred method of doing some of the similar things that I did. So, I think it has to be part of a balanced portfolio. I do think it makes sense to have higher touch opportunities for students to get to know each other and their professors earlier in the college career. But again, the experience that I had is one of such tremendous privilege. Even though I was a poor kid, I was a scholarship kid, and so I was able to go to a university and go to a college, thank you for reminding me, and have that experience that was so valuable. But not everyone has the privilege that I brought with me to my education. I think online education is one way of extending, again, to students who do not have the privileges of the ability to take 4 years off and to study, sit under a tree like always happens on the guidebook cover, and learn from a lofty master.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I have a two-part question, and the second part is kind of related to the first one. There's essentially two different models for upper administration in universities. You got the VPAA model, and you got the Provost model. And under the Provost model, if the president is not an academic, that's not necessarily as big of a problem, because the president's more into lobbying, making sure community engagement, things of that nature. Things that I think overall Cliff has done fairly well. Under the Provost model, though...
I don't even see who's talking. Who's talking? All right. I got you now. All right.
David Mitchell in economics. Under the Provost model, though, we're now going to have two people in upper administration who have, in my opinion, a serious disconnect from the lives of regular faculty. And I hear some of this disconnect in some of the things that have been said today about, well, maybe Missouri State kind of needs to move towards some workforce development. I kind of look at this as kind of like a mountain climbing analogy, where you're leading the team, but you've never climbed a mountain before. So how would you assuage faculty's concerns? Because faculty have discussed you quite significantly.
Yeah.
And I'll wait for you to reply to my second question here.
Sure. Candidly, it's going to take time to build the trust with the faculty member, for them to learn that I respect the work they do, that I'm not here to revolutionize Missouri State University, but instead to lift up the work of excellent faculty members. I won't be able to earn that trust overnight, but I can tell you that I will bring it to the job.
And my second question is kind of related to that. As, like I said, as basically the chief academic officer, second in command. We have this demographic cliff that's coming up. You've heard some other people ask questions about resources. You've heard other people ask questions about faculty salaries. Faculty salaries at Missouri State have been declining since at least 2008. So, for example, and this is not just faculty, it's staff as well. So, for example, somebody in 2008 that made $75,000 now makes about $68,000. And this is not just with the recent inflation. This has been a long-term problem. So once again, as the chief academic officer, it's your responsibility to allocate resources. And when this demographic cliff comes, where is that allocation going to come towards? Is sports going to get cut? Are faculty salaries going to get cut? Are faculty lines going to get cut? What's your plan for that?
Sure. So all budget decisions are made within the context of the broader ecosystem of the university budget. And I think it would be important to think about the important role that faculty play, the important relevance of each of the colleges. But it's also a reality that the university isn't carved in stone. And in order for it to continue to grow and thrive in the future, it will have to be dynamic in responding to things like trends in student enrollment. And so I can't give assurances about things like faculty lines, because I think the reality is that changes happen over time, and they're often very challenging to make. They affect individuals that we care about and really respect. But the reality is that higher education, just like the rest of the world, grows, evolves, and shifts over time, and we can't be sentimental about the budget. It has to be a really challenging conversation, and I know that it will be in the future. And as I said, we're looking at the probability of enrollment declines and of shifts within enrollment patterns. So I think there's a more politic answer that I could be giving, but the reality is there will have to be changes over time. What I can say is I will make those decisions as transparently as possible if I do hold this role. We'll talk with faculty members. We'll work with groups that can be involved in the process, so it's not perceived as one person's decision, but something around which a group of people can come to consensus about how to approach these things. They're always horrible and never something that administrators look forward to, but it is an important and bad part of the job.
Yeah. So the commissioner mentioned earlier at the beginning of her talk that there are 5 universities that are down 20% in credit hours over the last 5 years. We're down 13% in credit hours, guys, over the last 5 years. And so as we work through the budget process next year, no matter who the provost is, there are hard decisions to be made, David, about lines and about allocation of money, about salary, about lots of things. And one of the things I've tried to do and will continue to do is we have an executive budget committee that has faculty representatives chosen by faculty from every college. Our faculty, staff, and student Senate leaders participate in that, along with our administrators. And we try to figure out what the best use of our money is. And it is always better to try to increase revenue than to reduce expenses, right? And so I think it's really important that all of us are figuring out enrollment strategies, alternative programs, programs we don't have. How do we increase the pie as opposed to just thinking about reductions? And Keyshore, the University of Missouri's pay increase that they've announced in their budget is exactly the same as the one we're working on. So don't always read the hype.
Yeah. I would say, I've said a lot of things about my time with the University of Missouri that are maybe not as great as an advocate might want them to be. There were some excellent examples of how individual leaders within the institution approached budgets and budget decisions. The person who used to be the dean of the College of Education on the Mizzou campus did an amazing job of being extremely transparent about how the department or how the college's budget worked. What were the revenue sources, what were the expenses, in a way that was different than any information that people in other colleges or in that college had been provided in the past. That allowed the faculty members in that college to understand the importance of their role in recruitment and retention, and it created a very different dynamic. It didn't solve the world's budget problems, but it engaged the entire college in looking for solutions together, as opposed to waiting for a leader to announce a decision and then not understanding what circumstances brought it to light.
Last comment on this, and then we'll go on to another question, is as we look at the last 4 years of undergraduate credit hour production, and we say, well, across the board, we're down 13%, but it's not even for colleges. And so one college is down more than 30% of credit hours. Another college, College of Ed, is up in credit hours 4.5%. And so there are programs that are growing and there are programs that are shrinking within colleges, and there are going to be challenges, again, no matter who is in this position, there are going to be challenges in reallocating resources to keep the great things that we have here and lean into them as we move forward. But staying the same is an option for failure.
I have more of a curricular question.
Go
and
ahead.
that is our outgoing provost. The big project I saw out of him was a curriculum change in our general education, which is curriculum bigger than a department or a college. So I would ask you, where would your curricular insights come from for those sorts of broader curricular viewpoints?
Sure. So I'll be different from Frank in that I haven't been working with curricular development for most of my career. That means that I'll be doing a lot of listening to faculty members, understanding what the changing needs of students are as we think about how to make sure that a Missouri State graduate carries with them a certain level of knowledge and skill that they will need to be successful in their world after college. So my answer is there will be a lot of listening and a lot of respect given to faculty. And I'm not sure how I would come down on any individual decision because I don't know the full context, but I would do it with a lot, again, of respect and deference for faculty.
Now, the demographic cliff, my question is about international recruitment, international students.
Yeah.
The demographic cliff is for most of Western countries. The United States is one of many, Japan, Germany, and other countries. How have you dealt with in the commission, and what would you bring to Missouri State in terms of emphasis on international recruitment? Because that's a piece, I think, that we can increase enrollments.
And that is an area in which I think of Missouri State as having particular strength to build on. Long-term relationships with educational institutions in other states, global partnerships, which are clearly identified as a major priority in the current long-range plan, indicate to the Missouri State community, to Springfield, but also to the world that this is something that we're in for the long haul. This isn't a flash in the pan, and it's an essential part of the university's mission, not just an enrollment strategy or a revenue generation strategy. I've seen I've seen international student recruiting go lots of different ways at different higher education institutions around the state. We have friends just up the highway who invested really heavily and had a lot of growth in international student programs. And when changes in the United States geopolitical climate occurred, that university was really severely affected by very, very heavy reliance on that international student enrollment. So you'll hear a theme from me, and that's that there has to be balance. That institution had a lot of students from one country, and so a particular set of changes had a very large impact. So I think recruiting strategies that focus on students from different parts of the world, different countries, long-term relationships, and being the kind of university that our partners across the world feel safe sending their students to is a really big part of what we should do. I would also add that the Springfield community is as important probably as Missouri State in making sure that this is a place where international students have the opportunity to have phenomenal experiences, to feel safe and welcomed. And so conversations with organizations outside of the campus walls will also be really important in making sure that we have a long-term, thriving connection with pipelines to students from students across the country, or the world, sorry.
Hi, I just want to pick up on something that Cliff mentioned, that though we have a 13% decline in enrollment, it is not even. Some colleges have seen increases, some colleges, the enrollment has gone down. But resources would have to be reallocated, put it another way, cut because of down enrollment. What are the principles? I mean, is that the only factor that would guide you? Or can you talk about the principles and the values that you bring to the table that will help you make those decisions? Which department, which programs get cut, which should be retained, and what is the criteria that you would be looking for in order to make those decisions?
Sure. So data need to be one part of the decision-making process, but the way I've approached these decisions at the department is that data aren't the only consideration, that we also need to look at things like what will the workload be of the people who remain after any reductions in force are made, what communities is it absolutely essential that we continue to serve even when the numbers don't necessarily indicate that there's a case for doing so. So I would bring a similar level of consideration to my work in this conversation. It's not just a question of yes or no, but something that really needs to consider the broader context of enrollment numbers and other kinds of trends.
I guess mine's actually right along that exact same line, but maybe said a bit more bluntly. And that is, perhaps College A is enrollment is up, but perhaps a department in College B is more of what the workforce needs. College A, of course, is supporting the university because that's where most of our money now comes from, is tuition. But College B really is working for the necessity of the workforce. So how do you balance those needs, which number-wise may not agree?
Sure. It's hard to respond to hypotheticals, and again, I apologize for that because I know people want to get a sense of who I am and how I would make those decisions. You know, I think both have to be considered, which again, it's kind of a hard answer, but it's also the true one, which is there are some programs that it's likely the university will continue to offer even when enrollment changes. But it's also probably true that that will only be for so long. You know, so for example, if a program is in very high demand in the workforce, it suggests that there may be, a magnet that pulls student interest into the program. And if that's the case, then it makes sense to give it time to grow and see what the long-term trend is going to be. So it is a little bit of both.
Hi, thank you so far for all your time answering all of our questions. You've answered a lot of hypothetical questions, so I'm going to ask you a boots on the ground question. What are your plans if you were to get this job? We know that there's been lots of questions. The faculty are a little bit leery, as maybe you've picked up. So what are you going to do the first 30, 60, 90 days to gain our trust? What are you going to do physically to get to know who we are?
Yeah, absolutely. So not just getting to know the faculty, but getting to know the institution. In the first 30 days, I will definitely want to gain a very comprehensive understanding of the university's budget and, kind of what decisions have been made that affect the individual colleges in the past. So understanding the current status of the budget, getting an understanding of what's happened in the past, and getting a sense of what the projections might be for the future. I think the budget is often, kind of the quickest way to understand an institution, which may sound cheap, but it is, again, also true. So understanding the budget and knowing the context into which I'll be beginning conversations with faculty will be really critical. The next 60 days really will, for the next 30 days, a strong focus on getting to know the people. So not only the members of the administrative council, the deans and the staff in the provost office, but also people who engage through things like Faculty Senate, people who don't engage in things like Faculty Senate, to find out what the range of voices are out there. Not just the people who raise their hands, anytime there's an opportunity to talk with the provost, but those who tend to be quieter, but also to hold really important and strong opinions. The next stage really would be focusing on the long-range plan and understanding, what the university's commitments are in that plan, what work is already underway, how are individual colleges thinking about their role in achieving the goals that are articulated in the long-range plan, and as provost, what can I do to support their work? I do think a lot of this is listening in dialogue and transparency, and it will take time, whether I'm the next provost or someone else is. It'll take time to build that trust, and experience has to bear it out.
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one or two more, and then we'll wrap up.
Zora, thank you for being here. Sally Payne, Director of Workforce Development for the City of Springfield. I applaud MSU for considering making changes. I just got back from a national workforce conference, and it is a concern nationwide for higher education with declining enrollment. So it's not exclusive to Missouri or MSU. I think it is a value that you bring workforce development experience to the table. Workforce development at the state level used to be under the Department of Economic Development, and then you were the lucky one, and it got pushed under higher education. what would be your top 3 takeaways, and what have you learned the most about, working with us in the public workforce system? And also, I appreciate your comments about the adult learners. I'm part of the Adult Learner Network with Dr. Mara Woody and Dr. Marty Leathers, and I appreciate everything that you said about that. But what is the value that you bring to the table, having experience now with the public workforce system?
Sure. So, the public workforce system, in my view, is the primary way we have to reach and to talk to adult learners in particular. It's easy for us to reach out and talk to high school seniors because they're all in the same place for the most part. They're in schools. We can reach out through school counselors and get an audience with high school students, but there is no similar thing for adult people who are looking to make a change in their lives other than our public workforce system. So the job centers provide services, like I said, everything from just getting that first job, where do I need to look, what kinds of things align with my skills, how can I improve my resume, to thinking more about the future and what kinds of training or education can I pursue that will allow me to get there. So I think that the job centers and the workforce system are, again, a really important ally in our overall goal of making Missouri a place where more people have more education.
Last question.
Thank you for being here today. I am a faculty member in the College of Health and Human Services and still a practicing occupational therapist. And along with other programs, healthcare programs at the university, I think a lot of the faculty members are in a unique position in that we feel responsibility not only for our students, but for the clients that we still see, and then also to meet the significant gaps in Southwest Missouri where healthcare is lacking. And so as provost, I'm wondering how you might address the unique needs of those faculty members that are working to balance all 3 of those responsibilities.
Sure. Well, I think to the extent to which it's possible, I think it's helpful for faculty to view their teaching, research, and service roles as kind of interconnected or braided together parts of the same set of responsibilities. So that outreach function of serving, making sure that we're able to meet our state's healthcare needs is a really important part. So thinking about, are there parts of the promotion and tenure process that either make that easier or make it harder? Are there other things that we do in the provost office or decisions that are made that either support or take away from that sense of responsibility? Because my guess is that it's not felt only by people in the health and human sciences, but also lots and lots of other places. So, getting a sense of what we can do systemically to support that kind of thinking, because to me it seems perfectly aligned with the Missouri State's public affairs mission. And it's also, kind of a part of the bigger question about, is higher education workforce development or is it something else? When an institution like Missouri State was founded, it really was founded originally for some kind of workforce development, for preparation of teachers. The important difference was at the time that happened, the state supported these schools because they understood the public good that was achieved in preparing people who could be educators or miners or all the occupations around which our first institutions were organized. So the kind of thinking you're doing, again, perfectly aligns with the public affairs mission, and I think is a great example of what I think the public more broadly should understand about the great impact that public universities have on the state of Missouri.
All right, that's a great question to end on. Help me thank Zora for being here today. One last reminder, if you came in late or were not paying attention, you have until Monday at about noon to get your feedback into the survey. Go to the Provost Search webpage, and there is a place to give your feedback on each candidate. My commitment to you is I will read them all. Our search committee is going to read them all, and I'm going to meet with them next Tuesday to have a conversation, and then I will report back on those things to the Board of Governors when we meet the following week. Again, thanks for your participation in this. It is a critical part of the search process, and have a great evening.